Picture this. You're an old man. You've buried a wife, maybe two. Your kids have their own lives now, they call on Fridays, if you're lucky. The house is quiet. Too quiet. And then, she walks in. She's kind. She's warm. She listens to you, really listens, in a way nobody has in years. And within a few weeks, she's your wife. Within 3 months, you're dead. And the strange part? Nobody notices. Because you're old. Because you're sick. Because a man in his 70s or 80s dying in his sleep isn't a mystery, it's just life. Now imagine that happening. Not once. Not twice. But, by her own admission, 11 times. Some investigators believe the real number is over 20. Same woman. Same method. Same quiet Iranian towns along the Caspian coast. For 22 years. This is the story of Kulthum Akbari, the woman Iranian media now calls the Black Widow. And how she turned marriage itself into a murder weapon, hiding in plain sight for 2 decades while an entire region buried its fathers, thinking it was just old age. Stay with me. Because the way she finally got caught is almost as unbelievable as the killings themselves. Welcome back to the Dark Archive, the place where we pull the real stories out of the shadows and lay them out in the light, one case file at a time. If you're new here, consider hitting subscribe, because where this story goes, you are not going to see coming. Alright. Let's open the file. To understand how someone becomes a killer who operates for over 2 decades without anyone connecting the dots, you have to go back. Way back. Before the poison. Before the marriages. Before the Black Widow was even a name anyone had heard. Kulthum Akbari was born in 1967, in a small village called Mahmudabad, tucked into Iran's northern Mazandaran province, the lush, humid strip of land that runs along the southern coast of the Caspian Sea. If you've never pictured northern Iran, throw out whatever desert image you had in your head. This is a green, rice paddy, tea plantation kind of landscape. Small towns. Traditional families. Everybody, more or less, knows everybody. And here's the detail that should stop you cold before this story even properly begins. According to reporting on her life, Kulthum's first marriage happened when she was around 11 years old. Let that sit for a second. 11. We're not going to sensationalize her early life or pretend we can climb inside her head and hand you a tidy psychological explanation. That's not how real cases work, and frankly, anyone who tells you they know exactly why a person becomes capable of this is usually selling you something. What we can tell you is the shape of what happened next, a life that, from an unbearably young age, was already organized around marriage as a transaction. Not romance. Not partnership. A transaction. By the time Kulthum reached adulthood, she had already been through a string of marriages. Iranian reporting places the number of official and temporary unions somewhere in the high 30s over her lifetime. Some legal, permanent marriages. Others what's known in Iran as sigha or temporary marriage, a religiously sanctioned, fixed-term union that can last anywhere from an hour to years. It's legal. It's common, particularly for older or widowed men seeking companionship without the full legal weight of permanent marriage. And that detail, sigha, is not a side note. It is, quite literally, the engine of everything that comes next. Quick question for you: if a woman married and buried nearly 20 men, one after another, in small towns spread across a single region, How many of those deaths do you think it would take before someone, somewhere, started asking questions? Hold on to your answer. Because the real number is going to disturb you. Here's where the story stops being sad and starts being methodical. Sometime around the year 2000, investigators believe, Kulthum Akbari's marriages stopped simply happening to her, and started being engineered by her. And the target profile she settled on was chillingly specific. She wasn't looking for young men. She wasn't looking for wealth in the flashy sense, private jets, sports cars, none of that. She was looking for something much more useful, and much harder to protect. Elderly men, living alone, with property. Think about who that actually is. A man in his 70s or 80s. Maybe a widower. Maybe divorced. His children are grown, married, living in other cities, Tehran, maybe, or abroad. He owns his home outright. He has savings, land, sometimes a small business or rental property. And every single evening, he comes home, to an empty house. Kulthum understood something about loneliness that most predators never bother to learn. It's not a weakness you exploit through force. It's a weakness you exploit through presence. According to investigators, she would present herself to these men, sometimes through matchmakers, sometimes through word of mouth in these tight-knit towns, sometimes through direct introduction, as a woman seeking a quiet, respectable companionship. A wife for an old man's final years. Someone to cook, to care for him, to sit with him. Exactly what he'd been missing since his last wife passed or his marriage ended. And it worked. Over and over and over again, it worked. A husband in Sari wouldn't know about a husband in Babol. Families in Neka had no reason to ever cross paths with families in Qaem Shahr. She wasn't just choosing victims. She was choosing isolation, for them, and for herself. Every new town was a fresh identity. A fresh story. A fresh grieving widow nobody had met before. And once she was in, once the marriage, temporary or permanent, was finalized, the clock started. This is the part of the story that, once you hear it, you will not be able to unhear. Because what Kulthum Akbari did wasn't a single dramatic act. It was a slow, patient, almost clinical process, and understanding it is the only way to understand how she got away with it for so long. According to court testimony and investigative reporting, once a marriage was secured, Kulthum would begin, quietly, gradually, dosing her husband with a cocktail of substances. Reports describe a mixture that included diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, sedatives, so-called stimulant or sexual enhancement drugs, and in some documented cases, industrial alcohol. Now here's the thing that made this method almost diabolically effective. None of these substances, on their own, look like a murder weapon. A diabetic man having a blood sugar crash. That's not suspicious, that's Tuesday. An elderly man's blood pressure medication causing a dangerous drop. Common. A man in his 70s drinking, mixing substances, having a heart event. Tragically ordinary. She wasn't inventing a poison. She was weaponizing normal old age. And the pacing, this is the part that separates a crime of passion from a campaign. The pacing was deliberate. Investigators say that in the earlier stages with a new husband, when his condition would worsen from the dosing, Kulthum would actually take him to the hospital. She would play the devoted, panicked wife. Get him treated. Get him stabilized. Get him home. Why would a killer save the life of the person she's poisoning? Because it built a paper trail of care, not harm. It built a reputation, with doctors, with neighbors, with the man's own family, as a wife who looked after him. It bought his trust completely. And most importantly, it meant that when the fatal dose finally came, weeks or months later, there was already a documented history of this man's fragile health. Diabetes, hypertension, prior hospital visits, old age. So when he finally died, sometimes from what's described as suffocation, in some cases reportedly using something as simple as a wet towel pressed over the face while he was already sedated and unconscious, there was nothing for anyone to see. No wound. No struggle. No sign. Just an elderly, chronically ill man, found by his new wife, gone in his sleep. Reports indicate the whole cycle, marriage to death, typically played out in under 3 months. 3 months. Marry, care for, dose, hospitalize, dose again, and bury. Then move to the next town, and start over. Here's a question worth sitting with: how many natural deaths does it take, spread across enough towns and enough years, before a pattern like this becomes statistically impossible to miss, and yet still gets missed anyway? Because that's exactly what happened here. For 22 years. By the early 2020s, Kulthum Akbari had been doing this, by her own eventual admission, for over 2 decades. Husband after husband. Town after town. Funeral after funeral, each one small, local, unremarkable, attended by neighbors who had no idea they were burying the 11th, 12th, maybe 15th man to die under the same woman's roof. And here's what should genuinely unsettle you: at least one of her husbands survived. And even that wasn't enough to stop her. His name, according to reporting, was Masi Nemeti. At some point during Kulthum's killing spree, Masi became one of her husbands. And like the others, he was given a drink, described as a poison syrup. But unlike the others, something went wrong for Kulthum. Maybe the dose was off. Maybe his body reacted differently. Whatever the reason, he survived. And when he realized what had happened, when the pieces clicked into place, when he understood that his own wife had just tried to kill him in his own home, he did something that, in hindsight, is almost unbearable to think about. He threw her out of the house. And then he did not go to the police. Think about that for a moment. A man survives an attempted murder by his wife, and instead of a police report, an investigation, a warrant, he just ends the marriage and moves on. No headline. No arrest. Nothing. Why? We can't know his exact reasoning, and we're not going to pretend we can read his mind. But anyone who's studied cases like this will tell you the pattern is depressingly familiar: shame. Fear of being seen as the fool who married a poisoner. A reluctance, especially among older men in tight-knit, traditional communities, to drag his name, and his family's name, through a scandal like that. Maybe he simply wanted to survive it quietly and never think about it again. Whatever the reason, his silence became, unintentionally, one of the reasons Kulthum Akbari was able to keep going. Ask yourself this: if you were Masi Nemeti, if you'd survived something that horrifying, do you think you'd have stayed silent too? It's easy to say, of course I'd go to the police, from the safety of watching a video about it. It's a very different thing to actually live it, in a small town, where everyone will know your business by morning. But here's the twist that makes this survival story matter, the twist that turns Masi Nemeti from a footnote into the reason this entire case finally broke open. He talked. Just, not to the police. Not yet. He eventually described what happened to him to another family. And that detail, that one conversation, would end up being the loose thread that unraveled 22 years of murder. September 2023. An 82-year-old man named, depending on the source, reported as either Azizallah or Gholamreza Babi'i, is found dead in Sari. On paper, it looks exactly like every death before it. An elderly man, in poor health, married to a much younger wife who had been caring for him. A quiet passing. Nothing to investigate. Except his son wasn't satisfied. Something about his father's death didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was how quickly everything had happened since the marriage. Maybe it was simply a son's instinct that something was off. Whatever it was, he started asking questions instead of just accepting the explanation he was handed. And in doing that, in refusing to let it go, his path crossed with another man's story, the son of Masi Nemeti, the husband who had survived. Here's where the whole case turns. These two men, sons of two different husbands of the same woman, from two different points in her 22-year timeline, somehow found each other. They compared notes. And when they put the pieces together, a wife who married elderly men, who nursed them and then buried them, who had done this before, more than once, they realized they weren't looking at two unlucky coincidences. They were looking at the same woman. They recognized her. And they went to the authorities. This is the part of true crime that never gets old, no matter how many cases you watch. It wasn't forensics. It wasn't a lab test or a detective's hunch. It was two grieving sons, in two different towns, refusing to accept a tidy explanation, and finding each other. That's it. That's the thread that ended 22 years of killing. When police finally moved on Kulthum Akbari in September 2023, what happened next was, by several accounts, almost surreal. She didn't deny it. She didn't run. According to reports, when she was arrested, she looked directly into the camera and introduced herself, calmly, almost matter-of-factly, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, or perhaps as if 2 decades of practiced composure simply didn't have an off switch anymore. And then came the confessions. At first, she admitted to killing her final husband and, according to early reporting, around 10 others, putting the number at roughly 11. But as investigators dug deeper into her marriage history, the picture became far murkier, and far darker, than even that first confession suggested. Records showed that over her lifetime, Kulthum Akbari had entered into 19 official, legal marriages, and 18 additional temporary, sigha marriages. 37 unions, total, by some counts. And investigators found something that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Every single one of those husbands had died. Every one. Now, to be fair to the facts, and because this channel doesn't deal in exaggeration, not every death has been proven to be a murder. Some of these men were genuinely elderly and may have died of legitimate natural causes unrelated to her. That's the honest, complicated truth of a case this large. But when investigators laid out the full pattern, every husband dead, spread across 5 towns, over 2 decades, all following the same suspicious trajectory of sudden marriage, rapid health decline, hospitalization, and death, the scale of what they were looking at became almost impossible to comprehend. Officially, prosecutors moved forward with 11 counts of premeditated murder and 1 count of attempted murder. But investigators and journalists covering the case have said, openly, that they believe the true number of victims could be 13, 20, possibly more. Even Kulthum herself, when pressed, reportedly gave shifting, inconsistent answers about exactly how many men she'd killed, at one point suggesting she genuinely could not remember the precise count. Sit with that for a second. A woman who cannot remember how many husbands she killed, because there were simply too many to keep straight. If confirmed, this would make her the second known female serial killer in Iran's modern history, following a woman named Mahin Qadiri decades earlier. But in terms of scale, in terms of sheer number of victims and the length of time she operated undetected, Kulthum Akbari's case stands in a category almost entirely of its own. The case landed in the revolutionary court in Sari, and from the first hearing, it was clear this wasn't going to be a quiet, procedural trial. More than 45 plaintiffs joined the case, an extraordinary number, representing families from across the region who, once the story broke, finally understood what had actually happened to their fathers, grandfathers, and husbands years, sometimes decades, earlier. Imagine being one of those family members. Imagine having buried your father years ago, quietly, believing it was simply his time, and then turning on the news one day to hear that the wife who nursed him in his final months might have been the reason he died at all. Imagine having to relitigate your own grief, years later, in a courtroom, alongside dozens of strangers who are discovering the exact same horror about their own families, at the exact same time. That's the emotional weight this trial carried. It wasn't abstract. It was 45 families, forced to re-examine the worst day of their lives through an entirely different, far darker lens. In court, prosecutors described her as calculated, someone who methodically monitored her victim's health, waiting for precisely the right moment to escalate, so that each death would read as the unremarkable end of an unremarkable illness. The defendant was skilled at covering her tracks, prosecutors reportedly told the court. Most of the victims appeared to have died of natural causes due to their age and chronic illnesses, allowing her to continue for decades without raising suspicion. Her defense attempted a different narrative, requesting a mental health evaluation, suggesting that a pattern this extreme, this repetitive, this lifelong, couldn't simply be explained as cold calculation. But that argument met fierce resistance from the families in the courtroom. One plaintiff pushed back directly, arguing that the sheer planning involved, the careful selection of isolated, wealthy, elderly men, the deliberate spread across multiple towns, the slow-dose method designed specifically to avoid detection, demonstrated exactly the kind of clear, sustained intent that undercuts any claim of diminished responsibility. Here's a question this case forces you to confront, whether you're comfortable with it or not. Where is the line between someone who is genuinely, clinically disturbed, and someone who is simply, coldly, a predator who understood the system well enough to exploit it for 22 years? Courts around the world wrestle with that question constantly. In Kulthum Akbari's case, the court in Sari had to answer it with 11 lives, and possibly dozens more, hanging in the balance. In September 2025, the court delivered its answer. Kulthum Akbari was found guilty on all 11 counts of murder. The sentencing that followed reflected the specific structure of Iranian law, where the families of murder victims have direct legal standing in determining a killer's fate. For 10 of the 11 victims, the families demanded the maximum penalty, and the court granted it. 10 separate death sentences. For the 11th victim, something different happened. That family made a choice that, frankly, most people watching this video will find almost impossible to comprehend. They chose to forego the death penalty entirely, accepting what's known under Islamic law as blood money, a form of financial compensation, instead of demanding her execution. Two very different responses to the exact same crime, delivered by two different grieving families, within the same case, in the same courtroom. One family wanted death. Another wanted resolution, in whatever form they could find it, without adding one more killing to a story already soaked in death. Which response would you choose, if it were your father? There's no right answer here, and that's exactly why this detail matters. It's a reminder that behind every headline number, 11 counts, 10 death sentences, are individual families making impossible decisions in real time. On top of the death sentences, Akbari also received an additional 10 years in prison for the attempted murder charge, the case connected to Masi Nemeti, the husband who survived and, indirectly, helped set this entire reckoning in motion. As of the most recent reporting, Kulthum Akbari remains in custody, her death sentences pending in a legal system where such rulings can still move through additional review. The full, true scope of her killings. Whether the final number is 11, or 13, or closer to the 20+ some investigators suspect, may never be fully, conclusively settled. Some of those men are buried, their cause of death recorded decades ago as simple old age, never to be exhumed, never to be tested, never to be counted. That's the file on Kulthum Akbari, closed for now, but never fully complete. If this story affected you the way it affected me putting it together, let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. If you're new to the Dark Archive, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we open a new case every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and I'll see you in the next file. The Black Widow of Mazandaran, the Kulthum Akbari case. The Dark Archive. For 22 years, Kulthum Akbari married elderly, isolated men across northern Iran, and one by one, they died. Officially convicted of 11 murders. Suspected by investigators of killing more than 20. This is the story of how loneliness became a weapon, how a slow-dose poisoning method evaded detection for 2 decades, and how 2 grieving sons finally connected the dots that authorities had missed for years. This video discusses real crimes including poisoning and the deaths of elderly victims. Viewer discretion advised. Subscribe for a new true crime case file every week.